Hi guys, today I want to show you a Valkyrie Scepter Sword Torch build I've been playing for Willbender. This build does not use Valor to access Fury, but rather Inner Fire trait from the Radiance line. So the build can utilize Virtues as a Valk build and all the important utility that comes with that. This build is linked in the description if you want to look at it now. And yeah, let's start off with the traits. So first off in Radiance, like I said before, we use Inner Fire. Inner Fire gives a very high and consistent Fury uptime for little effort in the build. Unlike the other meta build for Willbender, which is Marauder Divinity with Greatsword, that build doesn't have a lot of burning application, but this build does. It also has decent Connie damage as well, as which we'll get into to scale for the burning, but although the main focus is the power damage. Our next trait gives us another Torch 4 every 10 seconds. And so with how it works, when we crit a target, we gain Zealot's Flame, which pulses unblockable burning around us, which could, in conjunction with F1, amount to 3 burns to proc Inner Fire, just off of the passive burning. But more importantly, more likely, when you throw the Torch 4, by pressing it again, it applies exactly 3 burns, which is what we need to proc Inner Fire. So we have that source of 3 burning twice in the build for 10 seconds on a 10-second cooldown each. And then on top of that, we also run Whirling Light, which will proc about 4 burns, and on the 4th tick, or if you follow up with any sort of attack, it will proc Inner Fire as well. And all of these are on a very low cooldown, less than 15 seconds. And the last source, like I said, is our F1, which the initial hit does 1 burning, and if you follow up with a few multi-hit attacks, which we have a lot of with running Torch, like Torch 5, Scepter 2, Sword 4, kind of Sword 5, and Whirling Light. There's a lot of multi-hits in the build, which is very good for Willbender with all the things that proc off of multi-hits, which we'll get into, but like F2, heal on trigger every 5th attack, the burning on every 5th attack, the Aegis on every 5th attack. So having a bunch of little multi-hits really helps proc those effects more consistently, which is useful for Willbender. But in our last trait, or actually real quick, this trait's important as well for Valkyrie. So here we get another 10% crit chance and 150 ferocity, which is just any source of crit chance we can get on a Valkyrie build is very important. So that's just for free for running this line. Resolution increases your chance to critically strike by 40%. This is a must in any Willbender build basically right now, but especially in a Valkyrie build, obviously. So of course we're going to run that. Next, this one, it's kind of up to your own choice. I definitely think Unscathed Contender is a better option. Your strike damage or your power damage is increased by 20% while you have Aegis. You might think we don't have a lot of sources of Aegis in this build, but we have enough to make use of this, and it's just your F3. I think this might get nerfed soon, maybe to a 40-second cooldown baseline instead of 30 seconds, because it's kind of overpowered right now in my opinion. But F3 is a very low cooldown to gain the Aegis boon consistently with all your multi-hits. So we're just gaining this damage mod for free pretty consistently. It's not an amazing trait, but it's just the best of the options we have here. And this is very important. So you have very low cooldowns on Willbender, and you kind of want to spam them to a good degree. Your Virtue's almost off cooldown, and this just gives us very high resolution uptime, 4 seconds off each proc. And we'll get into it later, but and then you get resolution every time you port for 4 seconds. So just those 2 traits alone is pretty much all the resolution you need. So for the middle trait, your F2 heals more off the passive proc, which is, like I was saying earlier, is very important with like the Scepter Torch build, because you have a lot of multi-hits, especially if there's multiple targets too with those multi-hits. This F2 heals a surprising amount. If you're cleaving a down and you have this F2 passive up, it goes a long way. If you have like a symbol on them and a Torch 5 or whatever you're doing, it actually procs pretty consistently. It's like about 500 HPS. It could be more if there's multiple targets hand resing. It's a little bit of a niche scenario, but it actually heals you a lot. So if you've been pressured but you manage to get it down, if you could just get that F2 out, which is common because it's such a low cooldown, 16-second cooldown when traded with virtues, and it has 2 charges, so, and you have RF too, so it actually heals quite a bit. But also the main thing that's also even better about this trait is just in conjunction with the low cooldown, like I said, is removing 3 condies and AoE is very strong utility to have for yourself and for your team. Without this trait, you would very easily die to condies a lot more. You would just have contemplation. And that's pretty much it. So F2 is a big source of Condi Cleanse in the build. This is a must. The 10% damage mod is nice, and maybe if you knew you weren't fighting like any condies for some reason, I guess you could run this, but basically, and even power classes have honestly a lot of condies they apply. Kind of, it just happens. So it's just always kind of 99% of the time the best trait to run. The next trait is a must, like with any other Willbender build, is the stab and stun break on your F3. This just makes the skill usable. Without it, it gets erupted all the time, so it's a big thing. The first trait, major trait in Willbender, can kind of be whatever you want. I'm inclined to say the power is better. It probably is, but the condi damage shouldn't be looked over. It doesn't matter too much, but this trait's actually not too terrible if you run it. Let me make sure if I'm actually running it here. I am. So if you compare this, so looking right here, I have about 600 condi damage. Now it's 700 from the Pulsing Might from Resolution. That gives us a decent amount of condi damage. Pair it with the fact that we're on Thief Rune, which adds 100 condi damage, and then 120 condi damage here, and a little more burning application from Willbender Flames, which is not very good because nobody stands in the Willbender Flames, but it can happen on downs and stuff. But it's just pretty good actually, because it actually gives you decent condi damage on a build that applies burning, the most damaging condi in the game. So it's actually not too bad. You do about, I would say, 2/3 the damage of Carrion if you take all those traits and runes and everything. So it's actually not too bad. Like, you're burning 1 stack of burning with like 8 might stacks. It takes for like 280 damage per burning stack, which is not bad. You have a decent amount of burning application in the build, so it actually adds up. It makes you feel like you're a grieving build or something, a hybrid build, which the build, yeah, it kind of is. So that's cool. But the power is probably better because basically every button you press scales with power, whereas only a few of them scale with condi damage, so it's probably better to run the power trait. And the extra burning application isn't really needed. You have plenty of it from 2 Torch 4s and Whirling Light. You don't really need more burning. So I think the power is actually slightly better, but you can run whatever you want. It really doesn't matter that much. The next trait is Prot and Resolution on Port. This is just, I think I said earlier, more consistent resolution uptime. It's nice to have a bunch of little sources of resolution in the build off of each skill, so if it gets rupted, or not rupted, if it gets purged or converted, the boon, you can just reapply it instantly, instead of like another build, like this front-loaded resolution is really bad, and it's also bugged. If you use the physical heal, it's bugged and it doesn't work. It doesn't, if you get hit, it doesn't work. If you don't get hit, it does work, but it's also just overkill. You have more than 100% resolution uptime. You don't need more. This is just overkill. But yeah, and the protection for 1.5 seconds. That little bit when you point into someone, if they have their own counterattack at that moment or something, it just helps you just do more trades basically. It's useful, and it pairs with F3, which has Prot on your F3. So this is like 6.5 seconds of protection, because this is a port skill on a 25-second cooldown. That's very good. So don't overlook that. None of the other ones are just useful enough, in my opinion. And the last two, we just take the middle Grandmaster, and then we have this minor. It's just damage, basically all it is. nothing to think about. Also, one little thing I forgot to mention, because you're Valk, you gain a lot of Condi damage based on a percentage of your vitality. You know, Valk obviously has a lot of vitality, so you're also getting Condi damage from this, the Pulsing Might, from Resolution, 100 Condi damage here, and 120 Condi damage here. So that's why, like I said, you're actually kind of like a hybrid build that does Condi damage as well. But moving on, let's talk about the weapon set. So the reason I like Scepter and Sword together is they seem to pair really well together. At least better than Sword and Sword pair together. I feel like Sword and Sword don't combo very well together. It feels like you can't really combo your Sword offhand damage with anything very well in Sword main hand. And I like having a port on each weapon set always available, and then there's a port on F3 no matter your weapon set, which feels nice. But especially with downs, it's just really nice cleave to just like Scepter 2, Sword 4. That'll just like oftentimes just wipe people out, especially if you have your F1 passive up or your F3 passive up. But then Scepter 3 is nice to have. The Great Sword build doesn't have that, and that it's not like it's a balanced skill. It just combos with things like Sword 4 or Scepter 2, 2 torch throws or an F1 or whatever it is. It combos pretty well with things. Or you can Scepter 3 Whirling Light. Pretty much anything on your toolkit combos with it well. So, you know, just something to keep in mind. And then so when you Sword 2 in, that's just Resolution and Fury to get a guaranteed crit to proc your Torch 4 passive, like it just procced right there, and then you can press it again and just use it twice and just get it out of the way. Torch 5 is another thing. Just keep in mind that it constantly pulses Condi cleanse off of your teammates. So if this guy had Condi damage on him, it's actually just super strong. It like removes like 10 Condis on teammates. So that's something to not overlook. People often forget about that if they ever use Torch. But yeah, Scepter 3 is just a great combo starter. You can pair it with Whirling Light as well. You can pair it with F1, whatever. It's really strong. One thing I want to note is, in general, when you're using your virtues, try to use F1 as your first or maybe second virtue, because you want to overwrite. If you're going to overwrite any passive virtue, like you see it down here, you want it to be your F1 because it's not more important in PvP than the F2, which is healing you constantly, or the F3, which is applying Aegis, which is damage mitigation and a damage mod with Unscathed Contender. So F1 is definitely if you're going to overwrite any virtue, it's the one you want to overwrite. So that's something important to keep in mind. I use Shelter because, as I was saying before, with all your multi-hits and the F2 trait to make it heal more, I actually feel like with how low of a cooldown it is, you heal enough. I feel like what's more useful is a damage mitigation, or like the pseudo invuln you get, the 2-second block. I feel like that has more value than the slightly increased HPS of the physical heal. The physical heal also is a bit buggy and it feels really clunky to use, so it's a little bit personal preference there. The physical heal has a little more HPS, but that's about all it has for it. You take no power damage from one attack, but you still receive the CC and Condis, and it just feels kind of bad to use, honestly. So that's my thinking for that. I feel like we have enough healing. I think damage mitigation is just more useful. Save yourselves. Every boon in the game is really strong, especially if you just need it for some reason, although any port or virtue press is going to give you the boons you need for crit chance. This just ensures it, basically. And it's a stun break, which we need in the build. Whirling Light, it's just a good amount of damage, weakness, and burning in AoE, so it just hits very hard. And we're a hybrid build. Like, look at the burning ticks. It was about like, if you had enough might, it'd be taking for like 1.5k burning if they took every hit, just from Whirling Light, and it's already off cooldown again. It's just a very strong ability to spend in fights. It's just free high damage. And then a very important skill, Contemplation of Purity. It's like the best stun break in the game, one of them at least. Break stun, remove all conditions. I'm sure you know what it does. It's very important. RF is very important. There's really no other options. So that's it for that. And so the crit chance. Here I have every boon you need. You can see we have 80% crit chance, and it's actually 90% if you include the 10% crit chance increase from burning targets. So you very consistently have a 90% crit chance increase on a Valkyrie build. And so what this build has that I like over the meta Greatsword build is the Greatsword build, you know, your Marauder, Amulet, and Divinity. Divinity gives you a nice bit of stats, you know, it's like the stat rune, but you know, I have 220% crit damage instead of 198, I think, with the Marauder Divinity. I have 200 more power and slightly more vitality. But basically, it's not that big a deal. Honestly, they're very similar in that sense, but the point is that Valkyrie is just a bunch more stats, including the Condi damage, which is actually relevant on this build, but the Condi damage and application is completely irrelevant on the Greatsword build. So that's why I like this build. You get to use weapon sets I prefer more, like Scepter, Sword, Sword Torch. I don't really like using Greatsword. It feels clunky and outdated, kind of, to be honest, as a weapon set. You know, Torch 4 has its problems, like, it's kind of hard to hit, like, that target's standing still, but if he was moving at all, it probably wouldn't land. So that's why I also like pairing Torch with Sword, because you can pour it in, get your crit procs, and then you can throw the Torch right in their face like it's a melee ability, which makes it land way more consistently. Thief Rune is the most precision you can get from any rune in the game, and that's highly valuable. For a Valk build, it has a free 10% damage mod on the 6th line when you're from behind or the side, so try to keep that in mind when you're hitting targets, if possible. And free 100 Condi damage, paired with all the Condi damage I've been saying for a while now. It's pretty big. So this is the build. I like it. 90% crit chance, about 2.4k power, 700 Condi damage, 220% critical damage, 20k health. It's just very beefy with stats. And then you have some really busted virtues like this: stun, break, port, stab, prot, resolution. All on a 25-second cooldown. This on a 16-second cooldown with 2 counts. Willbender is very busted right now. It's a very, very good ranked spec. So yeah, I recommend you guys try this build. It's a lot of fun. It's a little bit different from the Greatsword build. I find it more fun to play. So yeah, that's basically it. Like I said, in the description is the link to the build if you want to go watch that. And also, I was thinking of starting to stream on Twitch more. You can follow me. I'll have a link in the description for that. It's twitch.tv/Navinius. I'll be playing this build and others, and I also plan to add more builds to this channel in the future because I really enjoy Guild Wars 2 and making builds in Guild Wars 2. In fact, I think I enjoy making builds more than actually playing the game. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you enjoy theory crafting and that sort of thing, follow the channel, because that's what it's pretty much going to be about, and some gameplay. Alright, thanks guys. I'll see you later.